SpaceX just became the most valuable company ever to go public, worth $1.75 trillion. The reason isn't the rockets, it's a satellite most people have never heard of. Satellite internet has been overpromising for 20 years. So what makes this one worth $1.75 trillion in investor confidence, and what does it actually mean for your monthly bill? Start with the problem this satellite is built to solve. You pay around $80 a month for home internet. In most American markets, that money goes to one company, sometimes two. There is no real competition, and the price and speed you get reflect it. The median US home download speed sits at around 200 megabits per second. Functional, not impressive. And if you are in a rural area or a suburb the cable companies decided wasn't worth the investment, it is slower and more expensive than that. Around 20 million Americans still cannot get reliable broadband at any price. That is not a rounding error. That is roughly the population of New York State. SpaceX's IPO prospectus, the legal document their lawyers had to be accurate about, values the company at $1.75 trillion. A significant share of that is not priced on the existing network. It's priced on what comes next. That bet has a name, and the number attached to it should make every cable company uncomfortable. The satellite is Starlink V3. Here is the headline spec. Straight from SpaceX's own published filings, each V3 satellite is designed to deliver more than 1 terabit per second of downlink capacity to users on the ground. The current generation, the V2 Mini, delivers around 80 gigabits per second per satellite. V3 delivers more than 1,000. That is over 10 times the downlink capacity per satellite. Now look at the deployment math. SpaceX currently adds around 5 terabits of network capacity every week using V2 Mini launches on Falcon 9. A single Starship launch carrying V3 satellites adds 60 terabits of capacity in one flight. That is more than 20 times the capacity of a single Falcon 9 V2 Mini launch in a single trip. The entire current Starlink constellation of more than 8,000 satellites has a combined capacity of roughly 450 terabits per second. A handful of V3 Starship launches would match that, not in years, in months. And what V3 delivers to the user on the other end of the dish is gigabit-class speeds. The first time satellite internet has reached the speed tier that cable companies have used to justify their monopoly pricing for 30 years. But the raw numbers only make sense once you understand what is physically different about this satellite and why it needed Starship to exist at all. A V2 Mini satellite weighs 575 kilograms. A V3 weighs around 1,900 kilograms, more than 3 times heavier. When its solar arrays deploy in orbit, the wingspan is roughly 60 meters. That extra mass is not dead weight. It is antennas, processing hardware, and power generation, all of which directly translate to bandwidth capacity. Starlink satellites do not work in isolation. They are connected to each other in orbit by laser interlinks, high-speed optical connections between nodes flying in formation. Data hops from satellite to satellite across the sky before it ever needs to touch a ground station. V3's larger hardware handles more of this routing, which means lower latency and less dependence on where SpaceX's ground infrastructure happens to be built. The network works where the sky is not where the cables are. Starship carries 60 V3 satellites per flight. Falcon 9 carries around 24 V2 Mini per mission. The gap is bigger than the numbers suggest. One Starship V3 flight adds more than 20 times the capacity of a single Falcon 9 V2 Mini launch. Every Starship flight that delivers V3 satellites is doing the work of 20 previous launches in one trip in one afternoon. The result is a network that builds out faster, covers more users per satellite, and reaches speed tiers that make it viable not just in rural dead zones, but in cities. That is the part of this story the deployment math has been waiting for. And there's a scale implication to all of this that nobody is calculating yet, what it means for the competitive landscape when the constellation fills out. SpaceX has been adding capacity to the Starlink network at roughly 5 terabits per week through 2025 and into 2026. That pace is already remarkable. V3 changes the arithmetic entirely. If Starship reaches consistent commercial cadence, even a handful of flights a month, the capacity added to the Starlink network per quarter will dwarf what the V2 generation could deliver in a year. The constellation doesn't just grow, it compounds. Today's Starlink works best in lower density areas. There is enough orbital capacity per coverage area to give individual users good speeds, but pack too many users into the same footprint and performance drops. V3's 10 times capacity per satellite means the same footprint serves 10 times more users at the same speeds. That is when satellite becomes a serious urban product, not a rural workaround. That is what the $1.75 trillion valuation is pricing in, not the current network, the one that exists after V3 is deployed at scale, and the one that forces every cable and fiber provider in the country to compete with something they cannot build faster than SpaceX can launch it. That is the upside. Here is the honest version of what still has to go right, including one detail that most of the coverage has missed entirely. Here is where this actually stands as of mid-2026. The first V3 hardware is in orbit. On May 22, 2026, Starship Flight 12, the maiden flight of Starship V3, deployed 20 Starlink simulator satellites and 2 specially modified Starlink satellites called Dodger Dogs that are scanning V3 components in real orbital conditions, confirmed in SpaceX's own mission brief. That is a hardware test, not an operational deployment. Operational V3 launches depend on Starship's commercial cadence through H2 2026 and into 2027. If that cadence lands on schedule, the constellation builds quickly. If it slips, every consumer-facing date on this list slides with it. FCC regulatory approval for the expanded V3 constellation is still in process. SpaceX cannot operate the full network commercially until those approvals are clear. Here is the one that almost no coverage mentions. Your current Starlink dish cannot access gigabit speeds. SpaceX has confirmed that existing user terminals will need a hardware upgrade to take advantage of what V3 satellites offer. Gigabit tier service is not just about launching the satellites. It requires a new dish on the ground side too, which adds a real deployment step between the launch date and the date it reaches your address. Initial gigabit availability is expected for enterprise and performance tier customers in lower congestion areas first. Broad residential rollout is a 2027 story at realistic pace. Pricing for a V3 tier residential plan has not been announced. Here is what the math looks like when it does arrive, and what it means for the $80 leaving your account every month right now. You pay around $80 a month for home internet. In most markets, that goes to a company with no meaningful competition. The speed and price you receive reflect that. Satellite internet at gigabit speeds changes the competitive equation not because everyone switches to Starlink, but because the moment a satellite network is fast enough and reliable enough to be a real alternative, every cable provider is forced to respond. That is how broadband prices drop, not by switching, by creating a credible threat. For the roughly 20 million Americans who cannot get reliable broadband at any price, primarily in rural and lower density areas, V3 is not about competition, it is about access. A constellation dense enough and fast enough to serve those areas the way cities are served closes a gap that cable companies have had 30 years and never fixed. 3 things to carry with you from all of that. 1 Starlink V3 delivers more than 1 terabit per second per satellite, over 10 times the V2 Mini. A single Starship launch adds more than 20 times the capacity of a current Falcon 9 V2 launch. That is the number that makes satellite a genuine competitor to cable, not just a rural fallback. 2. The timeline has real steps. V3 test hardware is in orbit as of May 2026. Operational deployment runs through H2 2026 into 2027. FCC approval is pending, and your existing Starlink dish needs a hardware upgrade to reach gigabit speeds. Know all 4 steps before you decide V3 is ready for your address. 3. The $1.75 trillion valuation is not a bet on today's network. It is a bet on what this constellation becomes after V3 deploys at scale. The IPO told you exactly what SpaceX thinks that destination is worth. One quick note before you go. Everything in this video is about the technology, not investment advice. We are not financial advisors, and nothing here should be taken as a reason to buy or sell any stock. If this gives you a clearer read on what Starlink V3 actually is and what it takes to get there, subscribe to the channel. Every week we break down the biggest tech stories with real numbers and no filler. And our full SpaceX IPO roadmap video covers all 4 pillars of what that $1.75 trillion filing revealed to the public for the first time. That video is up now. I will see you there.